evolved to the time by the 20th century we had limited the justification simply to the defense of innocence. When applied to the question of abortion, the Catholic teaching is quite straightforward. The fetus is a human being. Sonograms make that clearer and clearer to many people. The fetus can never be an aggressor. Attacks on human non-aggressors are always wrong, even in war, and especially innocent life in the room. At the same time, we have to recognize that there are debatable aspects of this teaching in a pluralistic society. From a non-faith perspective, the issue of the humanity of the fetus may be questioned. There may be questions about at what precise moment does the fetus become human. Even from a faith perspective, people question, when does the fetus receive a soul? When is it identifiable as a person? The other important question is, where do the rights of the woman or the mother begin and end? We realize that those things have to be debated in the public sphere, even though our conclusion is clear, and we will argue for that. The same Cardinal Bernardin, who promotes the seamless garment, says that those who defend the right to life of the weakest among us must be equally visible in support of the quality of life of the powerless among us, the old and the young, the hungry and the homeless, the undocumented immigrant and the unemployed worker. It's not enough, as we recognize, to advocate for changes in abortion law if you're not willing to support those in crisis pregnancy, if you're not willing to provide adequate means for people to deliver babies, make sure that they can do so in a healthy way. It's problematic in a country where the infant mortality rate is increasing because of limited access to health care. Those are life issues that have to be addressed. Pro-life has to be broader than pro-birth. There are policy implications beyond the prohibition of abortion for those who believe in the sanctity of human life and that its preservation promotes the common good. Proposing this consistent approach to life issues, the Cardinal recognized that every person cannot be fully engaged in every life issue, but it is important to cultivate a consensus around the explicit connections of the life issues. Defending a right to life necessarily involves defending a concern for the quality of life. Even while distinct issues require distinct moral analysis, they aren't identical. The sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person are the consistent moral principles that help us to address them. When we talk about the dignity of human life, we find that there are many related topics, even things that cross into other fields like pornography, sexual exploitation or objectification, sexism, the different treatment of men and women, racism, human rights, domestic and foreign. From the Church's perspective and the perspective that the Church brings to the public sphere, they are always focused on the dignity and the sanctity of the human person. Similarly, the desire to use our common resources, our common good as government to reduce poverty and human misery is a societal responsibility, enhanced, but not only found, by the Scripture's preferential option for the poor. Access to health care is necessary for the flourishing of human life. How do we determine what is public versus private morality? Our answer from Scripture and tradition is that it's public if it affects the public good. And because we are social beings, so much does affect the common good. The Roe versus Wade decision was based on a right to privacy. Our approach would be that taking the innocent human life is a public matter. Is this what we want to be as a society? The question of why the Church is interested at all in social issues comes from that long-based tradition, starting with the Jewish prophets, who called attention to injustice, who called for repentance of those who were exploiting the vulnerable and the weak. It was enhanced by the witness of Jesus, who in our tradition we believe is the fullness of God made present in our world, and it was enhanced by the early Church, who strove to live by the teachings and example of Jesus, not just defending, but also working for the well-being of common good. In the Second Vatican Council, as I said, in the mid-1960s, the documents that helped the church to understand its place in the world called for not only an internal ordering of the church, but also a reflection on what the church should be in the world. And the document that teaches that for Catholics is called Gaudium et Spes, Latin words which means joy and hope. And the document begins by saying the joys and hopes of humanity, as well as the struggles and pains of humanity, are the joys and hopes of the church, the struggles and pains of the church. Everything that affects human beings, because we are made in the image and likeness of God, is within the realm of the church to teach. The church is a voice to contribute, not to dominate, but to contribute in the public sphere. Now fast forward to our present moment. Ever since 2013, when the Catholic Church has been led by Pope Francis, who comes from a different experience than the vast majority of his predecessors, the first pope from Latin America, the first pope from what we often consider the developing world, who joked when he stepped out for the first time as pope and said they've gone to the ends of the earth to find the pope. The ends of the earth, because he comes from the southern hemisphere, from Argentina. From the beginning of his papacy, Pope Francis has always looked towards the peripheries and to the margins. And he's called the church to its own kind of conversion, to be more attentive to those who are farthest from the center of power, instead of the other way around. He tells us that our moral compass should be set by those who are suffering the most. And that helps us determine how to best be human and how to best be followers of Christ, who emptied himself of power and authority and assumed the lowliness of human flesh. Pope Francis clearly and repeatedly includes the unborn in his descriptions of the marginalized, but he sees the lack of reverence for human life. He sees the lack of reverence for life in the womb as the consequence of a consumerist and materialist culture that has come to consider human beings to be just as disposable as our outdated products. It doesn't work for us, we can get rid of it. The same attitude that would prevent aborting a child the same attitude that would permit aborting a child allows for the careless indifference to the elderly, to the handicapped, and even the disposal of the terminally ill. He's decried in many of his teachings what he calls the globalization of indifference, which allows the powerful to ignore the suffering and deaths of the poor, even when this regularly occurs on a massive scale. Challenging the church in the United States, in particular, that has taken a strong stand on the abortion issue, but doesn't always teach convincingly the interconnectedness of all the issues. Pope Francis said, our defense of the innocent unborn needs to be clear, firm, and passionate, for at stake is the dignity of human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person, regardless of his or her stage of development. Equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, and the underprivileged, the vulnerable infirm, and the elderly exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, new forms of slavery, and every form of rejection. So even within the body of the Catholic Church, there's a call for conversion to a deeper understanding of the broad implications of what a stance about the dignity and sanctity and reverence for human life implies. And then Pope Francis has broadened our understanding of the context of life issues by pointing to the delicate circumstances of the planet itself, the care for creation. If we don't care about preserving the planet itself that sustains our life, it's hard to make a claim that we're concerned about the sanctity and the dignity of each human person. The Pope insists that the dignity of the human person who is given by God dominion over creation paired with responsibility is asserted in the scriptures, and he offers a critique of our tendency to diminish human responsibility for the care of others and the care of the elements of creation. When we fail to acknowledge as part of reality the worth of a poor person, the worth of a human embryo, the the worth of a person with disabilities, to offer just a few examples, it then becomes difficult to hear the cry of nature itself. Everything is connected. I think in his universal view of interconnectedness of all things and the primary concern about the dignity of human nature, there is a key that unifies all of the issues with which we are concerned in the public sphere. I hope I've made it clear that the church doesn't think it's its role to assert or impose its beliefs, but can't be excluded from the public argument, and brings a lot to that table from its network of witness throughout the country, from its 2,000 years history of dealing with these issues, from the clarity of a moral framework in a philosophical tradition that is able to expound it, and from its commitment to the sanctity and dignity of the human person. I think we have time for some questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Any questions that you might have? Well, Bishop, I have one question. You've given us a grand argument about this pro-life philosophy and worldview. As you look at all the issues, abortion, immigration, creation care, war and peace, right now, the church had to pick one issue. What would you say is the most pressing issue for this country right now?
Well, I think that's a trap that we don't want to get into. And there are many voices in the church that would say, well, it starts with the right to be born. Right? So there are many prominent voices in our church that would argue that that is the singular issue on which all the others depend. And there's a certain logic to that point for sure. But I think Pope Francis is really insistent on teaching us that it's all interconnected, because if you can justify the destruction of one type of human life, it's very easy to expand that and justify others. So where do we put our emphasis? That's a tough challenge for us. Our church has been consistent in its opposition to abortion from the beginning, and that's not going to go away. But when we have a situation where no party represents that fullness of life approach, and where you have to choose between two political parties, one that is strongly, at least verbally, in favor of the right to life at birth, but not so good about the support systems and the care of the environment and immigration and care of the poor, all those other things. It's very difficult. So that's where we find ourselves having to discern. And when the U.S. bishops issue a letter every 4 years before an election, it says we don't tell people how to vote. What we try to do is form consciences so that people can make the best choice they can with limited options, because there's no perfect or ideal candidate. So it's kind of dancing around your question, but we can't really say that one thing, because when you make one choice, you're ruling out all the other things that are very connected to it. And if our commitment to pro-life at birth also depends on having the circumstances in which the poor and the vulnerable can bring children into society where they're cared for and have the resources to do so, it becomes a difficult question politically.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Well, we want to give you a gift. We want to thank you for being with us. We want to give you a gift. And I don't know if bishops are allowed to wear T-shirts.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
We hope so. I couldn't find a bishop hat or anything at the bookstore. So anyways, we thank you so much for being with us.